Alrighty, good morning, everybody. It is Friday, September 22nd, 2023. Let's go ahead and jump into this here. If you guys recall, a couple days ago, and I don't know if I vocalized this, but in the chat room, I believe Tom asked a question about why, I guess, the state of the market. He asked, what about the head and shoulders pattern we're seeing? Like if we go up to the daily chart here, we have a really nice, clear head and shoulders type pattern. I don't really ever talk about these type of things, but sure enough, a couple days ago, we were looking at this, and this is what we saw in the chart, right? And I said, yeah, we do have that pattern. I also said that September is historically a bearish month. Now, I want you to look at what happened here ever since we moved into the month of September. And this goes back to, seasonality and just historical trends that we see in the market. This high right here up at the top, before the whole market started to sell off over the last, say, 2 to 3 weeks, this was the beginning of September. And ever since the beginning of September, we've had a pretty bearish market. Outside of these 2 attempts by the bulls for a couple days to go ahead and try to push, we've been in a very, very heavy market. So we talked about it in the chat room. I mentioned that we had a bullish rotational pattern from the lows that probably meant there would be an attempt for the bulls to bounce. I think this was back on the 17th, going into 17th or the 18th here. But the overall picture for September was that the bears were in power, right? And then yesterday morning, remember, let's go back to what the charts looked like yesterday, if I could, which was the 21st over here. We said we didn't have a really strong argument for the bulls from the lows. We were in the context of that huge sell-off from the day before, and it looked like the bears were still in power, and we were expecting the market to push lower. We talked about coming down to test into the huge scene of the crime here, where the market got this huge rotation that we talked about and called back on the day before I left for Sedona. I've mentioned it so many times, you're probably tired of hearing that. But that was the deal when I left for Sedona, the Friday before I left. We talked about everything lining up for the bulls here, and the fact that we bounced right around one of our scaffolding levels and our major retracements. Right, so that was the scene of the crime for this big bounce from the end of August to the beginning of September there. And yesterday we talked about coming down into this area and it being a very important spot to see what was going to happen here with the bulls, right? We see a lot of times the market come into a major area like this and actually end up holding for a bounce, sometimes maybe a fake out to then come lower or come down through it and then get a bounce. We talked about a couple scenarios in that case. But overall, yesterday we were expecting the market to continue to push lower with a possibility that maybe there would be trouble right around that scene of the crime. So let's look at what happened here in a little bit more detail on the shorter time frames, and then we'll get into the pre-market for this morning. So let's go back to yesterday and go back into the open here. So the market opened, and if you recall, I believe I had shorted just before the market opened here. I did short off the 200 moving average, but it didn't quite. It got 2 ticks from my first exit at 44.09. Just my luck, right? And missed and came all the way back, stopped me out, and then came right to the next expected resistance zone. And guys, I think this is now the 3rd day in a row where we had our first major resistance level that the market held. In some cases, it held to the tick over the last 2 days. In this case, it peaked through by just a couple ticks, and then that was the high of the day. Okay, so it's been 3 days now, and this is just kind of par for the course with the stuff we deal with here. It seems like nearly every day, one of our major levels is the high of the day and the low of the day, right? I'm not saying every day, but it seems like this is just kind of a Groundhog's Day in many cases. So yesterday, if you shorted our first expected resistance zone, you caught the entire sell-off. The market never came back to test into that high, and it just continued to sell off. So let's look at what else happened here. So that was a great opportunity. There's a reason I was shorting yesterday, and that was, again, because we had a bearish bias. Everything looked like we were at least going to come down into this first expected support area. So that was a good play from 14 all the way down to about 4,400-ish for a nice 14-point short. Again, it didn't quite make it there, and then finally we tested there. So I was able to catch it from here, and I took profit down in this area. But that was my play, and then the market came all the way back up and held the back end of VWAP for the rest of the day. So interestingly enough, the major rotation of the morning was to the tick off our preliminary scaffolding level. I'm pretty sure we're going to end up keeping that there. That was the first major bounce of the day. And if you miss the short off of our first expected resistance area, one of our scaffolding levels, you could have shorted the back end of the 200 all the way down, again, with the bearish bias. And then again, I would have been taking profit, not to the tick off our first expected support area, but probably a couple ticks in front of it, right? So you could have caught all that. And again, not surprising that we found support where we expected to find support. And then from there, the market tested through it. It actually bounced to the tick again off one of our scaffolding levels, held the back end of the 200. And then it got a little bit messy for a little while. But again, the key thing here is that we held a lot of our roadmap levels for the downside, okay? So from here, it got tricky. And like I said, I think in yesterday's pre-market, that's how it is sometimes, right? We start to get a directional move. You have some opportunities, and then it kind of peters out and goes a little bit sideways and then carries on in its merry way. So that's what happened yesterday. Again, it would have been sexy for the price to come right up into VWAP there and get the rejection. But for all intents and purposes, we held the back end of VWAP here and then started to come back down. There's your crossover right here. And then we held the back end of the 200 to the tick for the sell-off, right? And then it became a very, very, what's the word for it? It became a really strong directional move. And then you could play the back end of the FMA for most of the time all the way down. Again, holding the back end of the 200 to the tick again later on. And notice that the biggest bounce of the morning was right off our first support zone there, right? And then second bounce as it came down was just a couple ticks off of our next scaffolding level. I'm telling you guys, these scaffolding levels are magic. Like if that's all you traded, you'd very well make a lot of money, right? As long as you know how to manage risk, you know, and control your emotions and all those other things that really come down to making you a complete trader. And that takes a long time to learn how to work with your emotions and learn how to deal with losses. But that was your next bounce. And then we held the 200 and continued to come lower at the end of the day to come down and essentially bounce in the middle of nowhere here, right? We weren't quite at any of our other levels. But again, the high of the day was our scaffolding. So that's enough for the review this morning. I guess we can look at what happened here in the overnight session. And once again, this is again Groundhog's Day here with the stuff we do. We held the back end of the VWAP for a push lower, only to test our daily power level right there off the low of the day before. And then we started to get this bullish push, pulling back right to VWAP and the 200 on multiple occasions here throughout the overnight session. So some pretty good stuff you could have grabbed there. Again, this is stuff we talk about nearly every day for weeks and months now. So if you don't know how to play these things at this point, I don't know what to tell you, but there were some good opportunities just trading VWAP throughout the overnight session. As you can see, right about here is when the Hopel printed, right around 5 a.m. Central. That would be 6 a.m. Eastern or 3 a.m. Pacific. That's when our Hopel prints based on all the overnight price action. And then we held it nearly to the tick here, again, right to the VWAP to bounce, and this is where we find ourselves now. All right, so these are the patterns and the plays you want to get used to. Of course, it doesn't work every time. You could have watched it bounce once, twice, 3 times off VWAP, the fourth time, or the third time, sorry, 1, 2, 3, the fourth time, hello, you probably would have got stopped out, right? That's just how it is. You're never going to find anything that just works every single time. And that's the toughest part about trading. So that's our review here for yesterday. let's jump up to the higher time frame, see what the charts are showing for this morning.